Doo-doo-doo. All right. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be moving my laptop. I'm a professional videographer. Hey, so I'm back again live with the ironically named Forrest Tower from BC Wildlife Service, Wildfire Service. He's a information officer, and he's on the ground in Tumbler Ridge right now. So I'm just going to unmute him and throw over to him. Forrest, how are things going there?
Things are going good. I'll try and yell so you guys can hear me. And I might take over the camera so you can really hear me in a sec. But what you can kind of see behind me here is our structure protection crews are currently engaged in a pretty extensive test of the whole system that they have set up in one of the neighborhoods here that kind of nestles against the ridge that the wildfire is just on the other side of. So in terms of wildfire update, we haven't seen any real significant growth or activity right next to Bear Hole Lake Road, which is where this fire is sort of hung up on. It's still on the east side of that fire and south of Highway 52 primarily. You can also probably see that we have really clear skies and it's a bit windy, so we probably will see an increase in fire behavior throughout today and tomorrow, just since we're getting some clean air and some better sun. So the structure protection folks are working in full kind of preparation mode here still, testing. There's a heavy presence of them in Tumbler Ridge still. And then our wildland firefighters, kind of what they're working on today and just started yesterday, is putting in machine guard south of Highway 52 on the eastern side of Bear Hole Lake Road. And that's where they're working to try and work their way down south and then wrap around the southern flank of the wildfire. From there, we're going to be able to do hand ignitions or aerial ignitions because the winds are coming in from the west and pushing this fire east now. We have favorable winds, and so that will remove any of the trees that are left in between our guard and the existing wildfire. And when we do see what is probably going to happen again is an easterly wind direction, or where the wind is coming from, that will then, instead of having the ability to have the fire spot over our guard, we'll be able to have no trees there, and so we'll just start backing up actually. We'll have the ability to have a much better containment if we do see an increase in fire activity. So kind of all hands on deck right now in terms of preparation and what our wildland firefighting crews are doing as well. And so things are actually looking in a positive direction. I know that probably what people are thinking is if the fire situation is better, you know, why is there an order still in place? There is still quite a bit of work to do, honestly, to secure that western flank. Yesterday was the first day we were really able to get in there in terms of visibility with our helicopters and heavy machinery. And so from yesterday into today, probably into tomorrow and the next day, we're looking at finishing that line and doing any ignitions we need to do over the next 48 to 72 hours. Once that's done, we'll feel much more confident about what's happening on that western flank. And that's when we would, you know, start to think about engaging with Tumbler Ridge. It is their evacuation order. We just put in the recommendation as a BC Wildfire Service. And that ability to have that guard completed will really, really reduce the risk, because there is honestly quite a large risk still without that line contained at all, which currently it is not contained on that western flank. It's still out of control until we can get that machine guard done and completed, and ignitions, all that kind of stuff I've mentioned. We're not confident in that ability for the fire to be held there until we get that done. So that's kind of what's on the go right now. I don't know if the format is just me presenting to you, or if you have any questions for me or anyone that's in the meeting right now, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Perfect. Yeah, if anybody who's watching has any questions, feel free to toss them in the chat. I'll open up the window that shows the questions. So for people who are familiar with the area, give me a sense of basically are you starting right on Bear Hole Road and just working the guard towards the fire? How long along the road does it go? That sort of thing.
Yeah, so from my understanding, it is several kilometers of line that we need to put in. So we are starting right from kind of that turnoff onto Bear Hole Lake Road from the highway. And until now, we haven't really been able to work close to where the fire's edge is. Again, yesterday was the first day where fire behavior allowed us to get safely right into the fire's edge. Previous to that, what we were thinking we might have to do is potentially start our ignitions right from Bear Hole Lake Road and then go into the fire. And hopefully the idea is that if we can start fire from that edge, from a controlled line, how sort of the physics of wildfire works is it will suck all that energy into the main fire, and as the main head of the fire moves in a westerly direction, it eventually runs out of fuel. So that's kind of what we were thinking we would have to do up until yesterday. We really didn't see conditions materialize that were forecast, and so we've seen a really reduced fire behavior all along that western flank. So now kind of we've had the ability to change tactics, put machine guard in as close as we can safely get heavy equipment right from Highway 52 down south. It's not adjacent to Bear Hole Lake Road anymore, but it's kind of eastern, within 100 meters or so, or a couple hundred meters from the fire's edge. And then we would still need to engage in some of those hand ignitions, and or a combination of that and machine guard, fuel brakes, hand line. And so that's what we're working on right now. I don't know exactly the number of kilometers they want to complete down, but essentially we want to get from Highway 52 down and then wrap around the corner of where it would turn kind of, it's a long skinny fire right now, and get down to, partially, ideally, eventually we will get wrapped around this entire thing. But the main focus right now is just that western flank. Once we are really confident with that, we can start to begin thinking about further along the line of that southern flank and as well the northern flank. So yeah, that's kind of where we're working off right now. For reference as well, I think this is William Crescent is where I am right now. So this is the kind of neighborhoods that are right up against the ridge line that I think the bald spot is also on this ridge line. And for reference, right over this ridge, that's where the fire is. And so it's about 4 kilometers away still. It hasn't moved in any direction, in any westerly direction in a couple of days. But there is still potential that it can do that if we aren't able to get that containment in. So my message is there's still a lot of work. As you can see in behind me and around me, the structure protection, they're still in full kind of preparation and readiness mode and testing. And so things aren't done in the area, I guess is the message. We have our work we need to do as a wildfire service. Structure protection is still doing their work. Once everyone is confident in the plans and what's happening right now, again, that's when we'd be signaling to Tumbler Ridge that we'd feel confident that the risk is low enough that we could then engage in those conversations.
Okay. Best case scenario, worst case scenario. What are you hoping for, and what are you dreading?
So currently, honestly, we got the best case scenario that we were hoping for yesterday moving into today. We had really strong winds forecast for yesterday that were and the day before that were coming from the east potentially. So 2 days ago, that's when those really, really strong winds were predicted, and they just didn't materialize locally within the Tumbler Ridge area. So we were expecting that there'd be quite significant fire movement in a westward direction. That didn't happen. And so we're still kind of in our best case scenario of no significant fire growth, and our westerlies are helping to push this fire away. It's still burning there, but it's not moving in a westerly direction. And so that combination of weather variables has allowed us to have a bit of time, like I said, to get much closer to the fire. I mean, worst case scenario is that it switches back into easterlies, really strong easterlies, and or thunder cells develop nearby. That's really what's driven this fire is wind. And so that's why we're taking the opportunity we have right now in preparation for worst case scenario. If that does ever happen, it's not in the forecast, but winds are extremely variable in this area. If we are tested on our western flank, that's what we really need to have buttoned up before any switch in the winds or thunderstorms or anything develops that might increase our wind speed and variable wind direction. So right now things are looking really good. I would say we have, another day or two of hard work on that western flank from the wildfire side. Some hard work here to test to ensure that if and when we are tested, our guards on the western flank, if that worst case scenario happens, structure protection is confident that the setup that they have, it all works. That's what they're currently testing, the first kind of like full large scale scenario of this entire neighborhood. They constantly test in bits, but this is kind of a pretty large scenario they have going right now. We're tied into hydrants here, so seeing what that does to water pressure, water level, ensuring all the sprinklers works, all that kind of stuff. So right now things are looking actually really good, but just there's still another day or two of hard work that we on all parts of this response that needs to happen before we can really feel confident about the situation in Tumbler Ridge.
Okay. I've got a question from Jonathan. He's asking about helicopters. He says that they're not being heard south of town today. Seemed like they were using the local airport to refuel. Are they fueling somewhere else, or are there less helicopters active in the Tumbler Ridge area today?
We still have the same amounts. We have 9 helicopters. We just have kind of shifted our refueling areas. And also the fire or the helicopters are shared between this West Cascatna wildfire, which is one obviously near Tumbler Ridge, and then we are also managing the Peavine Creek wildfire, which is a bit northeast by Highway 52. So the helicopters are being shared between there depending on necessity. If you don't hear helicopters, that's honestly a good sign at this point. That means that they're not needed for bucketing. That's primarily what they're being used for right now. So the kind of buckets that you see that they're carrying to put water onto hotspots to assist our ground crews and heavy machinery, the fire behavior has diminished quite a bit on this side. And with the wind switching to come from the west, we're seeing all the fire activity, or primarily the major fire activity, happening more in the middle of the fire and on that eastern side. So our helicopters are kind of working where they're able to be supported by ground crews. And then I know that there's also some ignitions occurring on the Peavine Creek wildfire right now. I can mention that if it's of interest. So we have completed a machine guard on the southern flank of that fire. And so right now what's happening is the same thing I was mentioning about what we would hope to do on this fire. We're completing ignitions to remove those trees in between the machine guard and the fire, so that if we do get any winds pushing from the north in a southerly direction, of course, Kelly Lake, that community is south of the Peavine Creek wildfire. And so by removing those fuels, it really diminishes the fire's ability to pick up energy and move south in a quick rate. So bit of refueling, maybe less necessity on the western flank where you might hear them, and then as well operation happening on Peavine Creek, but still the same amount of helicopters, and we've kind of increased our fleet day by day as some are released from other areas in the province. And honestly, helicopters are in very high demand all across Canada. I'm sure everyone's aware that we're not the only province with a very high fire load right now. Some of the other provinces had their fires start earlier than us. And so Alberta, Quebec, all those places that have wildfires going, lots of times helicopters will just go where the work is, and until they're released to come back to BC, pretty much the Wildfire Service has every available helicopter that we can contract. They are contracted to us at this time. So yeah, aerial resources certainly are still here and are supporting.
Okay. Any word of maybe bringing in a water bomber, or is this the sort of situation where one of those or two of those would be useful?
So I guess differentiating between water bombers and our air tankers, neither of those will actually extinguish a fire. Both of those are used to slow the rate of spread of a fire. Usually upon ignition in either our air tankers, which would drop retardant. Those would be kind of primarily used to slow the head of a fire so that our ground crews have time to get there, heavy equipment has time to get there. They're often used sometimes in structure protection too, or we can lay some strips around an oil and gas camp, for example, where again, they still need to be supported on the ground to be followed up by. So, and then water bombers as well. They don't have the ability necessarily to completely extinguish a fire of this size. And so when we discovered this wildfire on Tuesday, we did have our tankers out and they were engaged. The fire was extremely, extremely aggressive. And I mean, I've repeated this several times, but it grew from 10 hectares to 1,500 hectares in under an hour, which is extremely, extremely fast growth. And so the ability for air support to really keep up with that rate of spread, again, needs to be supported on the ground by heavy equipment and crews. So they are still available. If we want to talk about worst case scenarios, if it was worst case scenario and the fire was threatening to cross that Bear Hole Lake Road, move up the ridge and then obviously come down, and the risk there is that it starts spotting into the community. Those are on demand and available. They get dispatched within moments notice of when they're called in, and we have them, at every kind of airport that we have a center in, as well as our zone offices. They're spread out in BC to be strategically equitable in their response time. So right now we don't have them engaged with us because they aren't able to put the fire out. And so those are really used in terms of, like I said, slowing that rate of spread down. So if needed and the fire started moving, I would certainly see a case where we would bring in air tankers to assist with that structure protection along this ridgeline. We haven't needed to use them so far in that, so that's kind of good news. And in terms of using them as a suppression tactic, once a fire gets to the size that it is of this nature, they can be used in parts of the fire certainly. And again, worst case scenario, we would bring them in if it was starting to threaten to cross that road. Right now, we're confident that with the crews that we have, the helicopter resources we have, the heavy equipment we have, coupled with weather conditions and observed fire behavior right now, they aren't necessarily needed at this time. And so that's why you might not see any of those sort of fixed wing aircraft, and we're able to rely on our helicopter fleet at this time.
Awesome. Now, there's a lot of oil and gas infrastructure as well as the wind power that this fire is threatening. What resources, what damage have you heard of so far?
So what I've been informed, like the sort of wind farm, the fire did burn in and around those turbines. I haven't been told that there's been any structural damage to the actual turbines. What there may have been, which we're still working, obviously we work in partnership with the company and the owners of all the various different capital or critical infrastructure here. Some of the transmission lines, so the wooden power lines, they were impacted during the fire, and so it was remediated, and we're working with the company. So no, I would say from my understanding and what I've been informed of, no long-term impact to them. It's more so that some of the power was disrupted temporarily when the fire was quite aggressive, and so it might have caused them to kind of look at their plans for either keeping them running, which was their preference to keep them running. It helps the turbine stay cool, actually. So I think they were able to keep it running for the most part, but I know that there was some, I would call shorter-term disruption from those transmission lines being affected. And I guess I'll just mention, other than that, I'm not aware of any other critical infrastructure or certainly no structural damage within the town of Tumbler Ridge. It's still, again, 4 kilometers back. There might have been some impacts to a wreck site that we're still working on. So I think it's called Bootleg or Boot something, the wreck site kind of in the south of the fire. We haven't been able to fly in the past few days just with how smoky it is. Again, yesterday was the first day we were really able to get good eyes on kind of the southern and western flank, as that's where all the smoke was being pushed over top of. We can't fly our helicopters in that smoke just due to transportation regulations of visibility, etc. So there might have been some impacts to that wreck site that we're needing to obviously work with Rex and Trails and get that info over to them. But I'm not aware of any other sort of structural impact or critical infrastructure impact that would be long lasting in terms of structural damage. It's more just short-term interruptions. Again, other than that one wreck site, which we just need to confirm. I haven't been informed of anything. And I think when we have space and it's not, all hands on deck response, then we can go and do those reconnaissance flights over those areas and get good information on them.
Okay, perfect. Is there? I mean, you've kind of got a strong contingency of crews there. Is there any discussion currently of changing what you've got, like bringing in more crews or sending out people? I know that it's always a challenge because you've got a number of fires burning across the province at one time, but would tomorrow or the next day, is it going to be fairly similar?
Yeah, so we have another unit crew arriving. Actually, I think they are arriving today, so we're continually seeing more resources show up. Again, like the fire started on Tuesday, and we do send out those resource requests as part of. So myself and the others on an incident management team, we're a group of rostered individuals who kind of are on standby throughout the summer. We respond to these wildfires and take command of them from a zone or from a fire center to alleviate that demand on the center. And so as soon as that happens, we were mobilized on Wednesday. We all drove up here or flew in from those, we're from all over the province. And as soon as that happens on Tuesday into the evening, the current incident commander is actually this is his zone, the Dawson Creek zone. And so he was putting in those resource requests, and it's literally just travel time to get people from all over the province here in terms of our unit crews that are stationed throughout the province. So we had crews immediately responding to it in terms of the local unit crew and initial attack crews. Like I mentioned, we had the air tankers on it, and we had helicopter response. And then every day since then, we've seen an increase in both wildland firefighters. And then Tumbler Ridge actually has really interesting partnerships and a really good setup in terms of mutual aid with other fire departments. And so we've seen fire departments from all over the province, as far as Salt Spring Island. They've sent their resources and their crews in assistance. And again, every day we see a few more people coming in terms of our crews and fire department crews. And then helicopters are the other one. how it works in terms of resourcing, in terms of BC Wildfire Service in the province, is once we do have a high fire load, we start to rank fires based on a number of rankings. It's sort of, life and property, critical infrastructure, environmental values, all those sort of things get put into an almost formula. And currently, this is the number one priority based on threat to Tumbler Ridge and a few of the other critical infrastructure threats, as well as, again, we have the Peavine Creek wildfire that adds into that critical response for the community of Kelly Lake. So we do have the ability to have a more influence in requesting some of those resources. And I would say we will start to stabilize in terms of how many people are here based on us feeling comfortable with the resources that we have becoming enough to meet the objectives that we have set out. So we're not going to see an ever increasing number of resources, but certainly, like I said, we have more crews coming in today. I would say in the next day or two, we would see that. And then once we start to stabilize, if best case scenario happens, or even, middle line case where there's nothing increasingly growing or threatening in any areas of critical nature next to critical infrastructure or community, I would see that stabilize. What usually happens in the timeline of an incident is the wildland firefighter crews will stay here. There'll be a number of the same sort of unit crew amounts and crew amounts. What you will see to start to decline, which is a good sign, is we'll start to release some of the structure protection people and send them back to their response areas. And that's sort of the timeline of, we need to also balance wildfire threat and then just presence of structural firefighters and all of the equipment you can see around me. Having people in here can actually impede their ability to be very agile in their response. There's oftentimes in full response hoses laid across the road. Sometimes we'll have hoses, structural protection folks will have hoses that are so thick you can't actually drive a car over them. And so it just impedes the ability of us to use those tactics when we have a full community back. Even if, there might be diminished threat, we still have the need to be able to respond very quickly in terms of structure protection. Winds can shift very quickly. We can see an uptick in activity. And so that's kind of where I would see the next movement in terms of resources is we'll start to release some of those structure protection. And that will align with the recommendation to put an alert in place instead of an order. And so as we demobilize all this gear and the structure protection folks start to leave, then that's when community can come back once there isn't all this stuff in their way. And once community members are able to safely be in there without risk of, like I said, getting trapped on their cul-de-sac with a massive hose laid across the end where they don't have the ability to drive out of their driveway, which that's the risk that there is if we do have a full community instead of having that order remain in place.
Okay, you talk about the structural protection stuff. I see it kind of spinning away in the background. Can you walk us through a little bit of how it works? I mean, it's basically a giant sprinkler, but
Yeah, I'll maybe just take the camera and you can probably hear me better and then I'll walk closer. And I will admit I am not a structural firefighter by any means, but this is my understanding. So what we are kind of hoping for is, I actually can't see what you're seeing, so I hope that you can see what I'm seeing pretty well. But
looks good.
the sprinklers you can see, they don't remain on the entire time. So this is why we would test these systems to make sure that they can run properly when we do have a full setup. And the idea for this is it raises the humidity of the air, so the relative humidity. It increases it and it makes a moisture bubble around the house. So we can see the trees in the back right behind this neighborhood. The risk that there is in a large wildfire, especially one that can burn pretty steeply up the backside of that slope, what it's going to do is it's going to start to throw embers over the ridge if we did see movement in terms of the wildfire. And so all those embers would start to land on the ground in people's yards here in all of these gutters. And so by having these sprinklers running, if it's not a test, obviously, we would turn them back on if in case there was wildfire. It reduces that ability for those sparks to ignite everything. And then we can still have wildfire burn right up to the backyards of people. It could be a low surface fire that we would try and really reduce that intensity of the fire. That's kind of the idea of why we'd have machine guard and like I mentioned, remove as much fuel as we can from our machine guard into the fire. It can still be a creeping, ground fire, burn right up to people's houses. We would have our structure protection, so those big tenders you can see there, they would be using all of their water and hoses to deal with kind of the backyard right now in the green belt. And then these sprinklers would be primarily protecting against embers that would be falling onto people's houses. So the risk, honestly, with this kind of stuff, If we leave them on, which we have seen in sometimes when people will leave, they'll turn their sprinkler on, or they'll put their own sprinkler on their roof and leave it on. It can actually flood your house and cause water damage. And in the case such as this, so far, the impact you would come back to is, no impact to wildfire, but your house could have structural damage to water. So that's why it's really important, again, that we can have kind of unlimited access into community here to be really agile in turning sprinklers on and off and testing and making sure that everything works, so that we're not damaging property by keeping the water running for days on end. So that's kind of the really simplistic explanation, is you're really protecting against embers falling onto people's houses, increases the moisture in the air, and then that allows the kind of larger fire department vehicles, combined with our wildland crews, to work in the adjacent sort of green belt and kind of do direct attack on the fire. Again, I'll throw it out there. It's something we always mention, but that's why some of those fire smart principles that I'm sure people have heard of, the houses that I can see in front of me, green sort of yards, mowed yards, that's what we like to see. Long yellow grass will really contribute the risk to a house if those embers are falling and the yard is what catches fire. So that's why you want to really remove any of those flammable items from right against your house, and then it really helps the structure protection folks. That's what you can kind of see down the street here, is some of those items pulled into the yard so that they can't catch fire and then go and ignite a house. The risk also is that it's not always the flames that are coming, and you can think some of the videos we've shown where it's a high crown fire where entire trees are being consumed. That's not actually usually what happens when we see impacts in community. Again, it's those embers that ignite a fence or a house, and then it starts to be house-to-house ignition. And so then we have not only a wildfire to be concerned about, we have full-on structure ignitions that may not have even been ignited from the wildfire, but because a single house started fire due to any number of combination of things, then we see house-to-house ignition. So really important to carry out those fire smart activities. It is assisted by that structure protection, and so that's kind of the strategy that we go in. And this is a very common setup in terms of sprinklers attached to gutters, combined with our tenders, and this is sort of just run-of-the-mill stuff for structure protection folks.
Okay, perfect. I've got about 30 people online. Is there anything else that that you think that people of Tumbler Ridge should know from BC Wildfire Services point of view? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, did you catch the question?
I didn't. I don't think I can hear them. Sorry, I think I can just hear you. So if you could repeat it.
Okay, no, it was just what other, is there anything else that people from Tumbler Ridge needs to know as of
Okay,
today?
perfect. Sorry. Yeah. I think in terms of just where to get information, on the BC Wildfire Service site, there's a dashboard, that kind of fire map. If you click on, I'm sure most people are familiar with this, but I'll just ensure that they are. If you click on the fire dot for the West Cascatinaw wildfire, it comes up with a page. We put all our updates on that page at least every morning in terms of what's happening throughout the day, what happened in the previous day. It also has a phone number for myself and my other information officer counterpart, Carly DeRosier. So both of us are available to talk to anyone one-on-one. If you want to give me a call, I'm more than happy to chat. There's also an email there that you can send emails to. And then as well, just for evacuation order and alert information, to explain to people that may not be familiar with it, the District of Tumbler Ridge is the issuing authority on that evacuation order and alert. The Wildfire Service just provides a recommendation to them. We're the experts on wildfire risk. So for any questions around that, I can certainly help you with my knowledge of wildfire risk, but our details of, especially once there's the downgrade to alert, in terms of re-entry information, all that kind of stuff, really defer to the District of Tumbler Ridge. They have a really good Facebook presence, so I know that they post a lot. And as well on their website, there'll be information, I'm sure, where you can find information on that. So those are the two plugs I'd have. Just make sure that you are getting information at the right place. I'm always available. I myself and Carly work pretty long hours during the day, so we're pretty readily available. And then I know that people that are watching this can see blue skies. It's clear. I would really want to impress that there still is a high risk from this wildfire. There's a lot of work still being done by structure protection people in town. We're still working. Basically, yesterday was our first day we were able to get really close to this fire from a fire behavior and safety perspective. And so we just need a couple days really to really feel confident on that western flank, because again, it's June 11th and we saw fires last year burn until October. The Bear Hole Lake wildfire is actually still not called out. So the one that's kind of in this area, Battleship Mountain wildfire, it's still not out. It burnt over winter. And so we have really, really high drought conditions in this area. It's very dry. And so this isn't the case where we have a fire in, mid to July to August where we are feeling confident in that every day the burning window gets shorter. We're moving into fall. This is a case where this fire can foreseeably burn until October potentially if we don't see any major intervention from the form of significant precipitation. So this is going to be a fire that requires presence on it, and we have a lot of time left that this fire can move. And so we need to be extremely confident in that western flank before we would be feeling good with letting people back into community, that they're not at risk. And what we don't want to do is call this early, let people back into the community or provide that recommendation, and then a couple of days later have to re-recommend an order. That's just not helpful for anyone. So I know it is frustrating, and I know that being on order is very stressful, and it's a huge interruption to your life. And so I want to send my appreciation to people that have left the order area and have allowed us to do this work without interruption and to keep everyone safe. And I can promise you that everyone here is working as hard as they can. It's our job at this point to get you back into your houses as soon as possible. And the timelines, I can never give a timeline on when things will change, but based on current information we have about weather, the work that we're doing on that west flank, the timelines now are in a shorter term timeline of we need a couple of days, 48, 72 hours to complete that guard is what we're expecting, and complete those ignitions. And so at that point, that's when we'd be working with Tumbler Ridge on what that looks like from their side, because they need to also manage some of the structure protection and other hazards that might be present when people have been gone for some time from their house. So there's a few different variables here, but overall, we're feeling optimistic now about this, and it's in a timeline of a couple of days of work for that guard on the west flank, and then that's when we'd be engaging Tumbler Ridge. So we're getting to a place, in the shorter term where we can start talking about that, and I just want to, ensure that everyone understands the heightened risk here still until we can really, really make that west flank good, because the fire is going to burn until fall. We aren't able to necessarily extinguish this one completely without, again, direct, huge intervention from a lot of precipitation. It's a very large wildfire. And as we have seen in the last few years, we're going to have wildfire starts here with lightning. It's extremely dry. And so we can't leave this fire, and not feel confident about it, knowing that we're going to have to respond to other initial starts that might be as vigorous as this one. We can't just leave this one and bump to the next one without feeling really good about it. And to do that, we need to have the ability to carry out ignitions and carry out machine guard, and we can't have people driving in and around this area, especially down Highway 52, either direction. We have a lot of our crews driving there every day, all the structure protection folks. So even just traffic, there's so many variables that are helped when we have an order in place that really expedite the ability to get things secured so we can bring people back into community. It happens much faster when we are able to have kind of a very safe workplace. So a long kind of spiel I have, but I know people have questions about, the less smoke, blue skies. I've been saying that wildfire risk is low. Why can't we go back in? That's kind of a few of the reasons why there's still heightened risk and work that needs to happen. So that's kind of what I'd leave it at. Feel free, anyone on the call, to give me a call or email at any time. I can give you kind of a one-to-one update. And unless there's any questions, that's kind of where I can leave it for now.
Actually, there were two other questions coming out of that. You don't have to be quite so fastidious in your answers, but the one is that we've been talking basically from a go versus stay, right? That it's either evacuation order or it's evacuation or everybody's back in the community. What sort
Yeah.
of intermediary steps are there between, you know, where we're at right now and
Yeah.
where we were?
I think I understand. Yeah. Yeah, so the intermediary step is an evacuation alert. So normally you're not under evacuation alert during the summer. Everyone's, not thinking about wildfire, or maybe you are. Unfortunately, in BC, it's smoky often throughout BC. But being under no evacuation alert or order, that's kind of baseline. That alert is the intermediary. So an order is put into place for all the reasons I've just mentioned. The intermediary is then, we would recommend to Tumbler Ridge to downgrade to an alert. That still means that at any time you need to be ready to leave within, a moment's notice. You're still on heightened awareness mode. You still need to be paying attention to what Tumbler Ridge is telling you, what the wildfire service is telling you, but you can be in your home safely with the knowledge that we can expect you to leave on a moment's notice. So that alert is the next step, and that's foreseeably what will happen in the shorter term here if all things hold equal. And so then you'd be on an alert. The alert will be removed down to nothing once there's almost no risk to the community. There can still be the wildfire. Like I mentioned, this is a large fire. It will still probably burn for some time. Once we're confident that there's no chance that it can move in the western direction based on the work that we've done, that's the kind of timeline where the alert would be totally rescinded. But under an alert, you're free to go about your daily business. Everything's somewhat normal. You just still need to be paying attention to those communication lines very closely and just be ready to go.
Awesome. I got one last question from Jonathan, which is just
Sure.
what's happening at the east end? We've heard about the One Island Lake evacuation, and Peavine
Mm-hmm.
Creek is they've got the whole issue with Kelly Lake. So give us
Yeah.
an update on that side.
Yeah, so I know that same story with structure protection. Essentially, everything that you can see here, that was started on initially when this fire started. So we've had structure protection engaged since the beginning. They are in the One Island Lake area doing the same sort of setup, probably not as high of a presence, just it's a much smaller community in terms of structures, but same thing. So structure protection ongoing there. Work that will be done on that side is honestly the same as what's happening here. It's just firefighting that happens always. We're getting heavy equipment in. Trickiness there is that I'm sure people are more familiar with this area than I am. I'm from Prince George and not from the Tumbler Ridge area. But it's quite difficult terrain here to work in terms of some slopes and creek draws. And from what I'm told about heavy equipment's ability to work is that it's kind of patching together lines instead of punching one line. How basic firefighting works is we'll get an anchor, we'll put machine guard around either side, meet at the top, burn from our guards, and if we need to, that removes the ability of a fire to move. When we have the difficulty with terrain, it often can just slow progress. But it's going to be the same thing. There's going to be heavy equipment working there, supported by helicopters with bucketing, hand crews in there, and primarily the focus has been on this side. Obviously, Tumbler Ridge, it has been under significant threat. That's where the focus has been. And so now with those shift in winds, now we need to shift our attention for sure on that eastern side. We still have way less fire behavior there than we have seen in the past, but it certainly might pick up if we get winds. And so then, yes, that's kind of the same sort of strategy on that side. Structure protection engaged, and same thing with Peavine Creek. I've already talked about the guard we have done on the south side. Burning from our guard into the fire removes the ability for it to spread south. And we actually do have structure protection folks headed into Kelly Lake today to do some initial planning. It's much farther away from Kelly Lake than this fire is to Tumbler Ridge. And conveniently, actually, the structure protection people we have here are the same people that did the whole setup last year on Kelly Lake. So they're quite intimate in terms of their knowledge of the plan and how to engage in that. So they're there just making sure that nothing major has changed in terms of infrastructure that they can use, etc. So same sort of thing, a combination of structure protection and then aerial suppression and heavy equipment, ground crews. That's the same sort of thing that's going to happen on that eastern side.
Okay, I've got one last question, unless more people
Sure.
ask questions, which was the fact. Basically, when we were evacuated, it went from 0 to 100 fairly quickly, and we didn't have the intermediary alert. Do you know why it just sort of went from nothing to out?
Sure, totally. So, like I mentioned, when the fire, so this is a lightning caused fire. We had air tankers over top of it as soon as kind of it was detected by smoke. We sent crews and aircraft were the first to fly over it. And so, from their initial detection of it, it was around 10 hectares. It grew to 1,500 hectares under an hour, and from there grew to its size of it's currently sitting at around 19,000 hectares ish. It grew to that size in under 72 hours. And so just how volatile this fire grew because of wind speed and wind direction and the fuel type, I don't need to explain it. I'm sure people know extremely high drought codes in this area and very, very dry. So that's not uncommon when we have fires start near a community. We'll engage in tactical evacuation sometimes where you don't even get an evacuation order or anything from the community. You will get an RCMP officer, a search and rescue person, or one of us knocking on your door saying you need to leave. That's kind of the worst case scenario is tactical evacuations. This one where it goes from nothing to order, that's again sometimes there just isn't the time to put an alert in place, and not that it's not anyone's not being slow or anything. It's just that the fire is moving so fast. There's no point putting you on alert. We know that there might be impact to this community, or we did know that there might be, and so the order was the kind of we just had to skip to that in our recommendation Tumbler Ridge and needed people to get out just again, that all happened within about 72-ish hours of ignition, maybe slightly longer. I guess the order went in on Friday, I believe. So that is why it was such a volatile fire, moving extremely fast. It moved 8 kilometers in a run. It moved 15 kilometers in a run in kind of either direction. So the fact that it could go that fast in a matter of several hours, moving an additional 4 kilometers to a community is literally a matter of an hour or two. So not really enough time to put people on alert, just because the fire moved that fast. Essentially, is the story there. It was not receptive to any suppression tactics. It burnt over retardant lines. It burnt over. We couldn't build machine guard faster than the fire would go. It just burnt over guard. So really, that's when we say, you know what, that community needs to leave. That is when there's imminent threat to life and property. They need to leave. And now the situation where it is maybe not imminent threat to life and property, but to secure that that there will be no more threat, we need the ability to work safely in this space. And again, for all the reasons I've already mentioned, having community back in just really slows that progress.
Okay, I know in 2006 the other issue is that uh, 2 of the 3 roads had were blocked by fire, and so there was worry that if the Highway 29 had been closed, which again is the one that's open,
Yep.
but if the fire had crossed,
Yep.
do you know if that played? I know this one was a little bit more direct shot at the community, but I'm sure that also played
Oh,
a
it,
role
it,
in.
it yeah.
So
Yep, 100%. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure people um, are aware since they evacuated. But when this evacuation order went into place, the Peavine Creek wildfire crossed Highway 52 after the order had been put into place. And the initial recommendation was that you could go through Highway 52 east or north or 29. And we had to amend that evacuation route, saying you actually can't go 52 east anymore because the Peavine Creek fire was burning aggressively down power lines, like energized power lines across Highway 52 East. Same thing with Highway 52. I don't know if locally it's north, but the north part out of Straight Shot to Dawson, that one it did cross Highway 52 actually, and luckily we've been able to contain that excursion across the highway. It's not really a threat at this time, but both of those highways were impacted, which left us one egress route from the community, a major egress route. Obviously there's many roads, but that major Highway 29. And if the fire even didn't, move in a direct west shot towards Tumbler Ridge, the wind direction that was happening at that time when the order put into place was that it might skirt north around town, but it still has the potential to cross Highway 52, cross the river, get into almost continuous spruce stands, and then it could cross Highway 29, which then leaves no egress to the community. So again, wildfire threat isn't, the flames of the wildfire are not the only thing that come into consideration in orders and alerts. It's all the other things about structure protection people, allowed access unimpeded, and then egress routes as well. And in this case, we had 2 of 3 egress routes compromised. Having only one available is not the best in terms of a major community ability to get out safely. So you're correct. Yes, luckily we had 29 or sorry 29 open, and we're working to kind of remediate the situation by the highways so that we can remove those road closures as well in a quick manner. But yes, that is also another big consideration, is those egress routes.
All right. Well, I've kept you for the better part of an hour, so I should let you go.
No
I'm
worries.
hoping to do this either tomorrow or the next day, depending on uh, um, how things change, if you're available.
Yeah, you bet. Why don't you and I connect? You have my number. If anything, if there's any major changes tomorrow, we can do one. I would say my fingers are crossed that we just continue putting in work and nothing major changes. And I won't have a huge update to tell you tomorrow, but I'm more than happy to pop online. And then, like I said, we're in the matter of days in terms of the timeline of the BC Wildfire Service, our kind of work on that western flank. There's other concerns and issues that the district of Tumbler Ridge needs to work on for downgrading that order to alert. That that's their responsibility as the local government. But from a wildfire perspective, that's kind of the timeline we're thinking about. I would never give a timeline because again, or a hard timeline because things can definitely change. But we're not in the matter of at this point weeks. We're under that at this point. So just trying to give a bit of optimism to some people in that we're looking good here. And so yeah, if we want to do this tomorrow, I can make myself available. I would say probably a more fulsome update on the progress made would be in 2 days from now. But if I want to hop on quickly, or if you want me to, I'm more than happy tomorrow.
Yeah, it depends on how many questions come up and
Sure,
whatever happens. But
you bet.
thank you for taking the time to talk to me, and I will let you go.
Awesome. Yeah, no worries. Thanks for setting this up, Trent.
All right. So for those people who didn't catch that, that was the ironically named Forrest Tower. He is one of the fire information officers dealing with the South Peace complex of fires, which includes the Peavine Creek fire as well as the West Cascatna fire, which is currently sitting and stalled about 4 kilometers from town. They're hoping to hold it at the Bear Hole Creek Road. And if you missed the first part of this, I'm going to hit finish. Hopefully, it will automatically save to Facebook, and you can watch it from the beginning there. I'm also going to save it over to YouTube and post it to the website. So that'll take, it's a 47-minute interview, so give it a little while to get there. If you have any other questions, either for Mayor Daryl Krakauka, who is dealing with kind of the human side of things, or for Forrest, who is the Wildfire Services Information Officer, send me a note, post them below this video, uh, give me a call. I don't know. Better if they're written down, though. I tend to forget things if they show up audibly. And other than that, hope to do this again tomorrow. See y'all later. Bye bye.